Good afternoon. We're really excited about our research and what we're presenting today. We spent a lot of time on it this semester, and we hope you enjoy hearing what we've done over the course of the last 16 weeks. So to get started, our group did a content analysis of pink slime in the print media, an in-depth look at newspaper coverage of the pink slime issue. We'll go ahead and do our team introductions. To get started, I'm Brooklyn Slabaugh, Senior in Ag Communications, also in Ag Sales and Marketing. After graduation, I plan to work for Dow AgriScience as a sales trainee.
I'm Rachel Hain. I'm also a senior in Ag Com as well as Ag Econ, and I'm hoping that I will have a job in Ag Marketing after I graduate.
My name is Krista Morehouse. I'm a senior in Ag Communications and Ag Economics. After graduation, I hope to find a job in marketing.
My name is Leslie Sturgeon. Of course, I am a senior in agricultural communication. And after graduation in May, my dream job is to become a journalist in the field of agriculture.
I'm Brittany Halton. I'm a senior in agricultural communication, agricultural sales and marketing. And after graduation, I'll be with Monsanto as a field sales trainee.
My name is Abigail Maurer. I'm also a senior in Ag Communication, and my goal after graduation is to secure a job of writing in the magazine industry.
Okay, well, to get started, Leslie and I are going to talk to you a little bit about an introduction of our topic and why it's important and why we chose it. So basically what we eat matters, and that's why we wanted to look at this topic. Consumers and the production agriculture industry, the gap between the two is growing further and further apart. Because there is such a large gap, consumers are often faced with the problem of where their food comes from and how it's produced. And oftentimes they seek the media as a resource for learning about these things. Therefore, the media is very important in how they portray different agricultural issues because it has such an influence on consumers. It can influence their beliefs and opinions about different food. We've seen this especially from the mad cow disease outbreak, where consumers constantly heard negativity about beef products, and actually beef consumption declined during that time of media coverage, heavy media coverage of mad cow disease. We've also seen through food safety issues where as food safety is covered more in the media, food safety practices have also increased. So we have seen that media has a large impact on consumers and what they believe and value. And that's why we think it's important that the media be accurate and portray stories with clarity. Some of the things that we expect news stories to have are non-charged emotions, also a frame that is practical with what they are presenting and makes sense, and then also that they use a variety of sources, incredible sources at that, so they're exploring both sides of topics. Quickly, our project, we looked at the New York Times and the Associated Press as our for content analysis because they're both gatekeepers of news media oftentimes, so we thought those were two good newspapers to look at. We looked at January 2012 articles through September 2012 articles because of the way the news cycle was for pink slime. The climax of the pink slime story was in March 2012, so we wanted to look at things leading up to March of 2012, that's January to March, and then after March, which is the March to September segment. So we tried to look at the whole news cycle for the pink slime issue. And I think I'll just let Leslie tell you a little bit more about our problem statement and our objectives.
Our problem is that the news media, as most people know, that this is to help consumers know what is going on in this with our food, and yet that there is really no study as to how they're going about the agricultural issues. These stories are covered throughout the news in their cycle. The point of that is it means that it helps us understand the effect that mass communication has on our consumers, especially the diseases that Brooklyn has mentioned, and talking about some of the issues in the media and how everybody's gone about it. And our objectives tell us that, we'll explain to you that this was designed to meet the following. First, it was to investigate the scientific firm finely textured lean beef, which is another term for pink slime. used in our stories. Our second objective was to look at the placement of pink slime stories in the newspaper. Third objective was to determine what sources were used in these stories and to see if there were any what trends, if any, were present. And finally, the final objective is to observe how the issue of pink slime was formed in the news to begin with and to discuss the implications of these frames. So now I would like to turn it over to Rachel for literary review.
All right. One of the things that we focused on in our literature review was framing in media. Frames are principles of selection, principles of selection, emphasis, and presentation composed of little inferred theories about what exists, what happens, and what matters. Framing can affect how respondents perceive risk and interpret events and issues. There are 5 frames that we focus on and that everybody uses in news issues, and those are conflicts, human interest, economic consequences, morality, and responsibility. A little bit about each of those. The conflict emphasizes the conflict between individuals, groups, or institutions as a means of capturing an audience's attention. The human interest offers a human face or emotional angle to the presentation of an event, issue, or problem. Economic consequences reports on events, problems, or issues in terms of the consequences it will have economically on an individual, group, institution, region, or country. Morality puts even in the context of religious tenets or moral prescriptions. And responsibility presents the issue in such a way as to attribute responsibility for its cause or solution to either the government or a specific group. Coverage of agricultural topics throughout the media provides the public a means of understanding agricultural issues. The media's attention to risk is influenced by the journalist's knowledge, news values, the human interest factor, and the amount of associated activity from leaders on the topic. Research communities, scientists, and government officials are important figures in the production of awareness, fear, and attribution of blame. And the stories about agriculture in the mass media tended to promote a nostalgic view of life and agricultural values, where agricultural magazines often took a pre-industry point of view and promotions for companies and agribusinesses. I'm going to pass it off to Brittany to talk about the lawsuit.
Okay, so for pink slime today in today's news, we looked at 2 articles from ABC as well as New York Daily Times. And within these 2 articles, it talked about, the first one talked about how Beef Products Incorporated shut down 3 plants, 3 beef production plants starting in May. And this is something that we have seen in a lot of the news articles today. A lot of beef production plants have been closing down because of accusations of having pink slime. This is what Beef Products Incorporated has gone through, and so they shut down in May 3 different plants, and that caused 650 jobs to be lost due to this accusations. Now moving on to the ABC lawsuit. In this lawsuit, it said that the same company, Beef Products Incorporated, had a lawsuit ABC because ABC believed that these fillers that were being used were being harmed for consumers.
I'm going to talk about the methodology we used in our research. We used the LexisNexis Advanced search to find the articles. We used only New York Times and Associated Press articles from January 2012 to September 2012. And each article had to include pink slime in the headline and or in the lead to be used. Then, once we found how many articles we would be dealing with, we put together a spreadsheet. And on the spreadsheet, we had a column for the headline, published date, byline, the newspaper section, the word length, the date line, and then if it was a web-only article. And then we also kept track of how many times pink slime was mentioned throughout the story, as well as where it was mentioned. And then we just made note if there was any synonyms used for pink slime. And then we also made note of what sources were used with their position. After that, we focused on the framing of each story. We would read each of the articles, and if it fit one or more of the framing topics, such as conflict, human interest, attribution of responsibility, economic, or mortality, then we would just put an X in each box. And from there, we had 4 other people read through it and make sure that we had accurate data.
Now first with our results, we used 38 articles, like we said earlier, that were from the New York Times as well as the Associated Press. And within these 32 articles, we analyzed them to gain insight on what sources were used, how many articles used a synonym for pink slime, and where the story was located in the newspaper on the internet, as well as what frames were used most. And first I'll talk about the code sources. So the code sources were what industry the people were in each article. And so out of the 38 articles, 11% were in academia, 8% were in consumer, 11% food professional, 30% governmental, and then industry professional was in 1% as well. So as you can see, a lot of the sources in the articles were industry professionals and governmental. So then we talk about the section part, and 67% was used in the business section. 6% was used in the domestic section, 8% was in the editorial section, as well as 8% was in the national and style and your money section. Then moving on to the framing, within these 38 articles, this is the number of times it was used in all of the 38 articles. So morality was used once, economic 20 times, attribution 25 times, conflict 29, then human interest was 12.
We saw from what Brittany talked about that government was one of the highest used sources. I think it was 67%. But we can consider that the government probably was used as a source several times because they're in charge of regulations when it comes to food safety issues, and I think this looked like a food safety concern to a lot of people, the news story. So government officials were used quite often, probably because of their influence in food regulations in the industry. Next, another highly used source was industry, and we can gather that this is probably because a lot of the framing was a framing of conflict, and this pink slime issue was very influential in the beef product industry or incorporated company. So they quoted that as a source very often as one of the sides of the story. So industry and government were 2 sources that were used most often, which makes sense. Then we have the section of the story that pink slime was often, or section of the newspaper that pink slime was most often in, and that was the business news. So people who were looking at this story knew that it was mostly considered business news. Finally, the last thing was that the media continued to support a trending slang word, pink slime, instead of the scientific word, finely texturized lean beef, which it's interesting that that slang word, which came from a professor who was disgusted by the product, termed that word, and that caught on and was continually used in stories synonymously with fine, lean, finely textured beef. I'm going to let Abby discuss the rest of our results now.
Very good. So as we see, as we've discussed previously, the pink slime issue is commonly framed in the context of conflict. And the question is, what does that mean for the people who are reading these stories, and what impact does that have on them, and how they are going to interpret what they're reading about this agricultural issue. And what we see also is that was also framed in the context of attribution. So conflict and attribution were the highest. And the implications for attribution was that the focus of the pink slime issue was more on the people involved with the issue versus the actual story itself. And the question that we're asking is pink slime safe for consumers to have? So papers wrote about who was responsible for the product pink slime and who was responsible for distributing it to the consumers. And so for those in the agricultural industry, the implication of this is that they need to is that the newspapers want to clearly attribute the issue to one person or another, and that they have difficulty discerning who all is involved with this, the farm to fork continuum. So we know it's not a simple process, but the newspapers want to take this issue of pink slime and clearly attribute it to one person versus exploring the complicated matter that it is and that many people contribute to making pink slime a viable meat source for consumers. And then moving back up to conflict, which was the one that had the most. Something similar to that is that we see the newspapers unwilling to explore the fact that there is a lot of gray in the issue of pink slime. And instead they present to the consumer these two polarizing views about the issue. Either you're for pink slime completely, that's what you think is the best choice for the consumer, or you're against pink slime completely. And they fail to take into account that there are a lot of people who fall in between that spectrum, and farmers even have mixed views on the topic of pink slime. The implications for this and what we need to consider, what we've gained from this study, is that we formulated some questions for future research. And we want to ask, how can we use and leverage attribution effectively? And how can we allow that to be a frame that helps farmers helps consumers understand who farmers are and what they're doing in society. And then we also want to explore how we can focus the attention off of the conflict surrounding an agricultural issue and put it more onto the actual issue itself. So how can people in agricultural industry, farmers, the government, how can they take the issue, how can they deflect the conflict that's surrounding this issue and focus the consumer's attention on the issue itself? The other implication that we have for this is that government leaders and food professionals, the two who contribute most to the news stories as we see, need to clearly articulate how consumer choices made in the wake of news impacts the agricultural industry and consequently individuals and families. As Brittany talked about earlier, this pink slime issue had several repercussions in the agricultural industry, with Beef Products Incorporated closing down a plant, and then conversely Beef Products suing ABC. And so we need government officials and the food industry professionals need to clearly articulate the decisions made in response to the news coverage of a particular topic will have far-reaching implications, and that we need to be wary as we approach a topic and as we discuss this in the mass media. Additionally, government and industry leaders need to carefully explain to news reporters the multifaceted nature of agricultural topics. Similar to, like I said earlier, the government and industry need to be able to articulate clearly that issues like pink slime aren't black and white, that it's not simply a matter of stopping making the finely textured beef. And so they need to clearly draw into account all the processes involved and accurately convey that to the newspaper reporters when they're writing their stories. So our pink slime content analysis offered us a lot of food for thought, and we learned a lot about how the news cycle works with an agricultural story, more specifically, the different frames involved and how that can have an impact on consumers. And it gave us a lot to think about as we delved into that issue. And so we are excited just to share what we've learned with you all today. And we're looking forward to exploring these questions for future research.